Right. Welcome everybody to the Retrofit Challenge for Housing. What is the plan? Our goal is to use this session to identify 3 key recommendations that we will forward to Claire Perry, who is Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth at BEIS. Now, as we all know, our homes are a major contributor to the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, mostly thanks to space and water heating. We have about 28 million homes and about 30 years between now and 2050, so we have to ramp up our activities in this space substantially. We're also adding to the problem every year because we continue to build energy inefficient homes. Last year, only 1% of new build homes were EPC A and 7% were EPC D, so we've got to do a lot better than that. And I think what we need to do is to create the conditions in the UK in which owner-occupiers and private landlords choose to improve the energy efficiency of their properties and find it easy to do so well. Now, why those 2 groups? Because between them they own more than 80% of all the homes in the UK and are therefore responsible for more than 80% of residential greenhouse gas emissions. We want them to act, and we know that for somebody to act, he or she has to have the capability to act, the opportunity to act, and the motivation to act. Yet the UK environment is not nearly supportive enough of any of those 3 in relation to improving the energy efficiency of homes, which means we need to look at all the people and all the organisations who influence householders' decisions, homeowners' decisions. And if we expect homeowners and expect owner-occupiers and private landlords to change their behaviours, that means a lot of others have got to change their behaviours as well. Architects, engineers, small builders, builders merchants, banks, building societies, credit unions, community organisations, estate agents, local authorities, devolved administration, UK government and others all need to change how they behave so that homeowners will change their behaviours. So the overarching challenge that I see is how to identify all the actors within the domestic energy regime and then identify how they should behave so that the vast majority of homeowners do choose to improve their properties and find it easy to do so well. Now, our excellent panel of 4 speakers will each give their own perspective on what needs to be done to accelerate the delivery of deep energy efficiency upgrades to our homes. I would ask you please keep your questions until all 4 have spoken, if possible. Now, our first speaker is Pedro Guertler. He's a senior policy advisor at E3G, which is an independent climate change think tank operating to accelerate the global transition to a low carbon economy. Pedro will be followed by Alice Owen, associate professor, business sustainability and stakeholder engagement at the University of Leeds. Alice is an expert in the socio-technical issues of building energy use, middle actors in energy systems, micro-enterprises and sustainability, and UK subnational governance and policy. Alice will be followed by Professor Will Swan, Dean Enterprise in the School of the Built Environment at the University of Salford, where he leads the Applied Buildings and Energy Research Group. Will has published widely on trust, retrofit and energy. Our final speaker was to have been Sarah Fletcher of the GLA, but on Friday, events beyond her control forced her to step down. I'm therefore very grateful to Keith von Tersch, a member of Capita's Zero Carbon team, which specialises in energy retrofit in housing, for helping us out at short notice. As an engagement manager for the Mayor of London's Renew Domestic Energy Efficiency Programme, Keith supports housing associations and local authorities to develop and deliver fuel poverty and climate change programmes. Pedro.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks everyone for coming and joining us. So I would like to take you through the big picture of the policy environment that supports renovation of our housing stock and what is needed to make sure we hit those greenhouse gas targets as far as the housing environment goes. For context, in 2017, the government published its Clean Growth Strategy, which set a goal of getting as many UK homes as possible to an energy performance certificate rating of C by 2035, which was good. That's good. And this encompasses the target to get all the homes of fuel-poor households up to that same performance standard by 2030, albeit that's the target for England only. So that's the priority, is to get those who can least afford their energy up to that standard earlier. And there's a commitment to get all social and privately rented homes up to that standard too by 2030. The Committee on Climate Change, which is the advisory body to Parliament on whether we're doing well enough to hit our greenhouse gas goals, said that level of ambition was about the right level, but highlighted how the existing and proposed policies and the level of investment from government are not enough to hit those targets. And they were the latest. Just a few weeks ago, they launched a housing report, which I really recommend you read. They look at how you adapt housing to a changing climate, as well as mitigate emissions from that housing. It's a brilliant, groundbreaking report. They were the latest in a host of organizations to recommend that energy efficiency retrofit be designated a national infrastructure investment priority. So to treat it long-term, to treat it differently and invest in it like you would road and rail projects. So why is energy efficiency and infrastructure investment priority? I happen to agree with the Committee on Climate Change on that. One, energy bill savings mean that we will have much more affordable housing. It tackles fuel poverty. It improves competitiveness by enhancing the energy productivity of the economy. It creates and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. It optimizes infrastructure investment. So it reduces the amount you need to invest in decarbonizing heat, for example. It avoids ill health from cold homes, which is estimated to cost the NHS £1.3 billion a year. It improves the productivity of the construction sector if you do it right. If you incorporate energy efficiency into other renovations that you undertake, that's a lot of added value for not so much additional effort, and that enhances productivity, which is a major governmental priority for the economy right now. And it minimises the costs and maximises the benefits of decarbonising the UK as a whole, as energy efficiency is one of the lowest cost ways of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions still available to us. And it enhances energy security by reducing the need to import gas, and that in turn improves our balance of trade, and that improves our gross domestic product. So it ticks all the boxes in terms of infrastructure. It's just as much infrastructure as energy supply, for example. And it works. Historically, this graph shows you energy bills. It's not precise. It's from an infographic. The blue shows you the energy bills as they've evolved since 2004. And the orange on top of that shows you how the energy bills would have evolved without the energy efficiency improvements in homes that have been installed since 2004. And our energy bills would be £500 higher today than they currently are without those energy efficiency improvements. So they work. There's a track record. Also, our electricity demand in homes is 13% lower than it was in 2004, and our gas demand is 21% lower. And there's still so much we can do. Cost-effective energy efficiency improvements could reduce our energy bills by a further 25%. That's £270 a year at today's energy prices that may well rise in the future. And doing everything that our current technology allows would enable us to halve our energy bills. So there's a real track record here. But the problem is, and this is despite, the falling energy demand is despite the fact that we've got more homes, we've got warmer homes, we've got way more appliances, we've got more lighting, light fixtures. So it works. However, the Committee on Climate Change says that since 2012, the rate at which homes are being insulated has crashed by 95%. And the Committee on Climate Change also said that for the first time last year, for many years, energy use and greenhouse gas emissions from homes have risen again. So the government's not doing enough. How much would it cost to get all homes up to an energy performance certificate rating of C? We estimate that it requires about £5.2 billion a year of investment. That's a big number. The blue on this chart shows you what the level of government investment is and how this has tumbled since 2012. It's about half of what it was back then. It's now 0.7 billion. It's not that the government needs to pay for all of this. Obviously, we all renovate our homes, we all invest in our homes. So the key thing is for additional government money to be geared towards helping all of us move towards making energy efficiency improvement a normal thing to do, so to unlock private investment. And so we think there's a funding gap currently of about £1 billion a year from government that needs to be filled, and there's a spending review that Treasury is leading this year, which has to fill that. And geared right, that could unlock a further £3.5 billion from private sources, which would mean we would stand a good chance of meeting the government's energy performance goals for our housing stock. It's not that hard. Other countries can do it. These countries that you see here on the left gives you an estimate of what their governments are investing in home energy efficiency retrofit per head of population. And you see Austria tops that particular chart. And these are countries which are comparable in terms of the age of their housing stock, the kind of climate they face, so similar kind of heating and energy efficiency challenges. Austria tops it at 85 euros per head, which is crazy. It's crazy high. England, when you look at England on its own, it's 9 euros per head. There's a wide variety within the UK. Scotland is doing a lot better, as you can see, at if I can read that right, 39 euros per head of population. So they have a different home energy efficiency retrofit program, and they have designated in Scotland energy efficiency as an infrastructure priority, and they're treating it that way now. Comparable countries all have clear action plans and goals for annual renovation rates. The UK does not. All have subsidies and regulation designed to unlock private investment, so to get us to part with our money for energy efficiency. All have high performance standards, sort of higher benchmarks, that if you hit those, you unlock more subsidy, but it also requires you to invest more, and programs that support that. And all have national communication campaigns and good hands-on bespoke advice on what to do about your homes. The UK doesn't tick a lot of those boxes. And this is doable. The thing to bear in mind is that we have an investment gap of £4.5 billion, both from private and public government sources. And it's a big number, but what we invest in our homes annually in terms of repair, maintenance, and improvement is £27 billion per year. So it's about tapping into that and ensuring that we maximize what we do on those things. We need greater and smarter public infrastructure investment to unlock more private investment, so get us to part with our own money and see the sense in doing this. So to close the policy gap, what we think is necessary is that the government designates energy efficiency as a national infrastructure priority with clear governance arrangements and agency potentially that oversees delivery across our housing stock, a long-term action plan and sufficient funding to deliver. Scotland has done this and is seeing results. We need that additional £1 billion public investment per year. We need adequate incentives for able-to-pay households. So most of that additional money actually is to support low-income households, ensure they're not left behind as we make our economy greener and lower carbon. But we need incentives for the able-to-pay households. One of the things that has gained a lot of traction in terms of our sort of circles and government is looking into is whether you could adjust, for example, stamp duty, which you pay at the purchase of a home, to reflect to some degree the energy performance of that home, thus triggering, okay, maybe I can bring my stamp duty bill down by doing something after I move in, or asking the seller to do something. We need robust regulation, strengthening over time towards requiring that homes have an energy performance certificate of C. We have that in the private rented sector. They have to be an E rating, and the government has got plans to tighten regulation over time towards that rating of C for the private rented sector, and they are looking at social housing and doing the same there as well. The big missing piece here is the owner-occupier sector. And we need a long-term approach to delivery in which local authorities and those who have local expertise play a core role in tackling fuel poverty, creating demand for energy efficiency retrofits, and growing local supply chains. And we need an advice service that is able to be delivered locally, that is locally relevant, that can engage with households on a face-to-face basis, because all we have right now is half a phone line and a website from, in terms of government-sanctioned advice, and that is just not going to be enough. So those are the sorts of 6 pieces, I think, that are missing. There's a very easily said, much harder done, and I think some of my colleagues here will be going on to the specifics of how you then deliver this in practice and make sure it works so that people are happy with the energy efficiency renovations that they undertake.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks, Pedro.
That's great, Pedro. Thank you. Can I have a copy of your slides? Thank you. That's really good. Set the scene nicely.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Pedro, for setting out so clearly the policy imperative that drives the plan that we're hoping to discuss here and now, and also for making a pitch for not one or two, but a whole 6 measures that should be in that plan. So let's see if I can add to your list further. My focus is on people and the organisations that people are part of. We know that there are, as well as the policy challenges, massive technical challenges in how you transform the existing building stock so that it is effectively zero carbon, which that fantastic report from the Climate Change Committee a couple of weeks ago laid out very clearly is the scale and nature of the challenge. And I'm sure Will fill us in more on the technology and the innovations and limitations there. But my point really is that all the technological innovation in the world is no good to us, even if we've got this fantastic policy framework, if we don't have people who can deliver the work that the policy framework aims to support. The people that I think are really important to this issue of delivery, particularly if we want low carbon retrofit to become just standard, mainstream ways in which we work on existing buildings, are the builders and the trades, usually in small firms. And these are not audiences that policy makers find it easy to deal with, because the likelihood of your small builder with a very successful practice in lofts and conversions turning up to focus groups is quite small. So I'm going to outline briefly 3 points. The first one of which is that no individual group can achieve the huge change that we're talking about in terms of retrofit. We have to look at system-wide, this is my bit of academic jargon, co-evolution. Second, that within that system, builders, trades, and the smallest firms are important and overlooked, and we need to pay attention to them and work with them, not just hope they'll magically see the light and come round to do what we expect. And third, that if those building firms are to achieve their transformative potential in this sector, then we need to take positive action to support them where they are as construction firms, rather than expecting them to suddenly care about energy issues and generate energy expertise. And so my headline in terms of what I'd like to see on our top 3 actions is a part of the plan is to actually recognise, work with, applaud and support the small construction firms that dominate the renovation sector. So on that first point about how all parts of the renovation system are linked and things have to shift altogether, let's start with the simple conceptual of the supply chain. And the easiest way for any of us to think about this is as a conventional linear supply chain, like the image I've just put up there, where there's a flow from manufacturers to merchants to construction firms and into buildings, and it's all about the flow of materials and achieving commercial value out of the flow of materials. Sometimes it's construed as a value chain, but still we're talking about financial value and commercial value, understandably, rather than energy conservation value. So let's just make some space to add some other elements that I think are really important to the behaviour of people along that supply chain. And I suggest we need to think about a supply network rather than a chain. So the two elements I've just added, top left is environment and top right, institutions, and they come from frameworks developed by academics in this area called co-evolutionary theory. These linked elements have to change and evolve together, the idea being that none of them can change without being either constrained or enabled by other actors. So the two I've added in there, changes in the natural environment might bring climate changing emissions much more under scrutiny in both policy and practice, or simply the scarcity of raw materials in the natural environment might change what manufacturers are able to cost effectively produce. And it's worth noting that the other addition, institutions, is a really, really broad catch-all term. It's really, I think about it as the rules of the game. It might be about trade standards, it might be about training standards, it might be about policy, or it might be about other sort of social norms and what's acceptable behaviours. So recognizing that everything is constrained by everything else leads you to this sort of diagram or conceptualization, which is the stuff of which academic papers are made. And it may well be true, but it's not necessarily that helpful to see that everything's connected to everything else. And the question then becomes, where do we focus our attention first to move the system? And I suggest we could start where these 4 starbursts are, which are the potential places where innovation and change might arise. It might well come from top right, the policy frameworks, or it might come from technological innovation out there on the left-hand side of the diagram, or it might come from customer demand, those challenging clients who say, we want sustainability, low carbon outcomes almost at any cost. But I would say the thing that we probably overlook, and where there's a huge amount of innovation happening, is the innovation that happens by builders and trades on the jobs, day in and day out, when, if you're doing practical work, the problems you face are legion and can only be tackled once you know the detail of the parameter, once you've got the plaster off and you know what horrors lie beneath, effectively. So I think too much of our focus around innovation and change in retrofit has been on technologies, and we need to look at these other forms of innovation, particularly those in the small firm, generated by small firms. And we also need to think about where are the feedback loops that connect a problem, the way in which a problem is solved on a particular job, connect that back to the impact on building performance. There is very little for that a practitioner, a builder gets in the way of feedback about the energy performance of their building after commissioning. They'll know if the aesthetics aren't liked by the client, but those other issues around energy performance are not visible. So just to continue and extend the evolutionary metaphor, if we're thinking about where those 4 starbursts come up, then we need to understand what are the selection pressures that are going to enable those innovations to move around the network, and what are the adaptive capabilities that all these blobs on the network might need to have in order to work with the innovation. So that leads me on to my third point, which is that if these building firms are to fulfill their transformative potential, then we need to support them in very specific ways. I think we need relevant, fair regulation and training and capacity building that leads to meaningful accreditation. Let's be really clear here, not all regulation is red tape. Sometimes regulation is a way of setting the acceptable rules of the game, and that is actually welcomed by most practitioners. It avoids them being undercut. And in particular, building regulations that set standards for components, details, and whole house performance are welcomed, as long as, at the local level, they're supported by building inspectors who have credibility and understanding of the context in which the regulations are being applied. And building regulation becomes an advisory process, and accreditation becomes something meaningful that really does demonstrate quality rather than a box being ticked. I think the thing to hold on to here is that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are as many different approaches to low-carbon retrofit as there are builders and trades in the sector. But we also, retrofit itself, we're coming to understand, isn't a fix-and-forget solution either, is it? We are going to have to keep revisiting the buildings that we're renovating now as standards and expectations change. I think too often the characteristics of the people who carry out repair, maintenance and improvement are cast as problems. So I think my challenge to you, to us, is to find ways of working with the grain of the industry so that small firms, localized knowledge and enduring networks and expertise are locked in as part of the vital ingredients for success rather than being things that we're meant to navigate our way around. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Alice, thanks.
Ooh, there we go. Good afternoon. My name is Will Swan. I'm from the University of Salford Applied Buildings and Energy Research Group. And to some extent, I'd like to talk about the technology and some of the things that are happening, some of the things that we're seeing that may change some of the discussion around retrofit a little bit. And I think to some extent, when we're talking about retrofit innovation, we need to think about what we're trying to achieve. When I first started getting involved in this about a decade ago, the rules were slightly different. With energy consumption, demand and supply were slightly different. And there are a lot of transitions going on at the moment that maybe change some of the argument and some of the way we do things. I think the other thing that we're very keen on is measurement and how do we know if we're succeeding. I think to think about some of the issues around what we call the performance gap, which I'll touch on in more detail, and thinking about ways that maybe we can understand and shorten the innovation cycle. Retrofit is not massively complicated. Really, we're dealing with the fabric, the systems, the controls, but it's actually how we scale that up, how we bring new products to market, how we improve things can be quite complex. So I won't dwell on this too much. I think Chris certainly touched on this a little bit. But like I said, when we first started, a lot of it was about passive consumers of energy. A lot of it is largely gas and even still is gas. But there are things that are happening in terms of the way we consume energy, the patterns of our consumption, the ability to store, manage, produce our own energy, which can slightly change the argument about how we manage the depth of retrofit and how we address the outcomes in a slightly different way. I'm going to put this up, but really this slide sort of came about largely because it was so complicated for us. So you can see this slide here. This relates a little bit to what Alice was talking about. It's very difficult to read because there's so much stuff. And that is largely the problem with retrofit. It's an immensely complex subject area. So technically, it's easy to retrofit a house. You can look at a house, design a retrofit, put some insulation on it, change the windows, put a new heating system in it. That is not a particularly complex thing to do in some respects. It's how you scale that up, how you deal with the operation and maintenance, how you finance it, how you fund it, how do you get a supply chain to deliver 1,000 solid wall installations. And that is really where a lot of the complexity of retrofit lies. And the reason I put this slide together was about 10 years ago, the head of retrofit for Greater Manchester, where we're based, stood up and laid out a very ambitious plan, a plan that was partially achieved in some respects, for the delivery of retrofit in Greater Manchester. And somebody put their hand up and said, "What are you going to do about interstitial condensation?" Which to a policy guy is just anathema. And I think this is the kind of complexity that we're dealing with. We're talking about the supply chains that Alice is talking about. We're talking about technical performance. We're talking about behaviour, finance, warranties, liabilities, all the things around this circle. So although I'm going to narrow the conversation very much now, I'm fully aware just how complicated this can be. The first thing, the EPC, we use it to drive policy, we use it to say how well we're doing. Is this the correct approach? Does it actually tell us what we're actually saving? Does it tell us how a house is really performing? I think those of you who are familiar with the performance gap would probably say not. We're doing a bit of work in this area. We've got somebody doing repeated EPCs on the same property. And some of what is being shown to us is quite telling. And so the reliability of the EPC necessarily to say, yes, you know, we're hitting zero carbon is perhaps limited. It's not without its value because it is, you know, it's a useful asset rating. But we might be getting to a point where there are slightly different solutions to the problem. And so really, knowing about what to retrofit, what properties, what's working, how we can innovate, and what does the customer understand. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is measurement. Here is the much maligned smart meter. There's a few million of them out there now, and they have a certain amount of promise in helping us understand how buildings are performing, because it gives us, when it's fully functioning in the way that it will be intended to be, it gives us information about energy inputs. So if we marry that information up with perhaps a smart heating system which gives us temperatures throughout the house and maybe some weather data, if we look at the cooling curve over the night, we can perhaps start to see what the conduction and convection losses are on a property. That tells us about the fabric. So Bays have recently funded a project called Smeeters, which is to look at precisely this problem. And to some extent, you know, we can do that cheaply and quickly over and over again to make it increasingly reliable. And that can help us just say, that house is a basket case. We need to do something about that. That house maybe we can leave further down the line. So this helps us prioritize. And that's really where we are. The smart meter infrastructure is greatly maligned. It has huge amounts of potential, not just in the measurement, but also in the way we manage energy. So the other thing is understanding products and systems. It's very, very difficult to understand how a product actually performs. So a lot of products are tested in the lab. You will take a small piece of insulation, you will put in a hot box, you will be able to get a lambda value, you will be able to get a U value. You take a boiler, you put it into a lab rig, you will say it's X% effective. Once you actually start putting all these things together, that's where the performance gap creeps in. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, that building there is the Salford Energy House. So that is a whole house in a climate-controlled lab. And in there, we've done controls tests. So we actually discovered that TRVs, thermostatic radiator valves, performed much better than was originally assumed. We did a whole house retrofit using off-the-shelf products where we reduced the heating demand on the building by 65%. So it's very doable, but again, it's a question of scaling. But these types of experimental approaches are important because they tell us how something is performing before we start doing field trials. And the issue with field trials, there's a really good study called the Pennyland trial. Because, you know, we're quite latecomers to this, but the Pennyland trial basically has a line in it that's somewhere that says, why would anybody want to try and understand the performance of a house? It's just too complicated. And it is. There are lots of uncontrolled variables. You have to have very large samples. It's very expensive. And even then, it still will be inconclusive. And this makes it harder for small companies to innovate. You know, there's issues around Eco3 coming out where there's innovation opportunities there, but it can be quite hard and expensive for a small company to get into those kind of regulatory frameworks. This building here is our follow-up to Energy House 1. This is Energy House 2, where we will be able to build all sorts of different types in there. So the first one is really about that Victorian property. This, we will build anything we like in it. And part of that project is allow us to work with small businesses to help them do precisely what I'm talking about, to help them to shorten that innovation cycle. And I think one of the things that we've really been sort of struck by over the last 2-3 years is the energy system is changing. That we're just about to start a large project called Homes' Energy Systems, but there's lots of projects like this around the country. We're looking at the electrification of heat and transport, the increase of storage and renewables. We're also looking at the introduction of that smart meter infrastructure can actually create opportunities for us to say, actually, when we're pulling down energy, can we pull down the least carbon intensive energy that we can? Can we store that energy? Can we sell it back to the grid? Can we allow our systems to be controlled for demand side response? And where we're talking about the funding gap, all of those types of control of energy consumption have value. And they have value to people like DNOs, they have value to energy companies, they have value to spot traders and aggregators. And perhaps some of that $4.5 billion that we're looking for might be driven through the smart meter infrastructure and actual genuine smart grids. So I think we're a little bit away from that yet, but to some extent it changes some of the argument about where we get the money from, and perhaps it changes some of the argument about how deep we have to go, because very deep retrofit is where a lot of the risk lies. Very deep retrofit can create that interstitial condensation problem. Perhaps if we can really manage the carbon intensity of what we do by not just our demand, but controlling the supply, controlling and storing and attenuating energy in different ways, we might find ourselves with a slightly different argument in terms of the fabric of the building. So I think there are new ways of thinking about the problem. I think there's new ways to innovate, and I think it's really important that we have a good throughput to get things to market quicker. But I think there are significant changes that might create some more opportunities for retrofit. And it's very far away from being a technical problem. I know I like things that we can stick screwdrivers in, and we understand the behavioural, the policy, the warranties, the liabilities, the banks, the pension funds. They're all actors in this. But actually, you know, making something that works, making something that is measurable and we can see that it works is important as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will.
Good afternoon, I'm Keith Von Tersch, and I've been asked today to talk about money, really. And I think we've touched on it a bit in some of the other presentations, because you can see it's integral to everything that we do in terms of any sort of retrofit project. And it's very hard to bring money in and to get sufficient money to deliver what we need to do. And I think that comes back to what Pedro was saying about that £1 billion that's sort of missing from the money that we need in the pot to drive further investment. So I think, for one thing, we need to think about costs, and we need to realize that delivery probably, we want it to be cheaper, but at first it probably needs to be more expensive. We know that it's really difficult to retrofit, and that when you go into a property, you open up the walls, you pull up the floorboards, you find surprises. So even if you have a wealth of data about a property, you're probably still, when you're actually in situ, you're going to find that there's more problems. So we need to address the fact that happens, and that those costs need to be picked up in what we're doing. And we need to close that performance gap that we were just talking about. And that means skilling people up. It means making sure that you spend more time on projects. And generally, it means more cost. So we need to accept that there's more costs in what we're doing. But we should also see the other side, that it does increase the value of the properties that we're in. And so we need to be able to weigh that up more accurately. At the moment, I think most people who are doing this sort of work just see it purely as costs without a huge amount of benefit to it. But it's improving the asset value. It means that house will last longer. It means that actually when you're opening up that house and you're finding problems, you're dealing with those problems instead of waiting until they cause even more problems for you. So we really need to kind of reposition what we're doing to understand that this is actually something desirable we want to do to properties. And we need to be doing it faster. We should be delivering something like 1 retrofit a minute at the moment, and we're so far from that. So we need to figure out how to scale this up and ensure that we've got the money in place to do that. So we really need a major intervention in housing. Something like the Green Deal that we talked about a few years back, but we need it to be successful, obviously. But we need to be talking about that sort of scale of intervention. And at the moment, the current funding that's out there doesn't really offer this. It's very piecemeal. It's very hard to determine who's eligible. It's very hard to navigate the administration that's involved, the paperwork. And in particular, eco-funding, I think, is a great example of this. It's the one that people are chasing probably the most obviously. We've mainly focused that on the fuel poor, and that's very laudable and important, and we don't want to lose that. But it means that we're spending a lot of time running around trying to find the right people, the right fuel-poor people. We know that the eligibility criteria doesn't necessarily identify the right people, and it's often very difficult to get the information from people, to find the right properties, to find all of the criteria that matches. And so we're spending a lot of time, energy, and money on things that are actually not delivering retrofit particularly. So instead, we really need to refocus and think about how do we go into a property and identify what needs to be done, survey that property, put together a whole house retrofit plan, and figure out how we can fund that. Because everyone really needs to support to do this. It's not just the fuel-poor households. We're not delivering on the scale we need. We need able to pay people to be engaging as well, and we need it to be across tenure as well. So we also have social housing. Eco-funding provides some money for that. It means we have to find the E, F, and G rated properties on the EPC scale. But that, for social housing providers, they're actually already thinking bigger than that. They've seen these targets that are out there around hitting a C rating by 2030 that they're expected to meet. And so simply doing the worst properties isn't only what they want to do. They want to be expanding and looking wider. So we need to think about how does the funding help them and not constrain them in what they're doing and constrain their thinking about what properties they should target. And then we've got the private rented sector. It's got the minimum energy efficiency standards in place now, so that's going to drive some real action in the sector that's really, in the past, has struggled a bit. But obviously there's a cap on what landlords have to invest, and that includes VAT in that, and it includes any funding that they can find. But in a way, it's kind of good luck to them to find the funding, because mainly what they'd be after is eco. And the administration involved with that makes it really difficult for someone who maybe owns 1 or 2 properties to actually engage, find that funding, and help them out to deliver what they need to. I work on these projects regularly. I help social housing providers in particular to develop them. And even there's limitations to how much we can do to support people to bring funding in. We have to rely on installers to help us with that because it is so complex and there is such an administrative burden there. So we need to make this all simpler for people as well. There is other funding out there. There's the renewable heat incentive, for example. One of the other ones that we're doing quite a lot of work around at the moment is the Warm Homes Fund, which is delivered through Cadent and their subsidiary Affordable Warmth Solutions. And that's looking at trying to get people central heating in fuel-poor homes. And it's really interesting fun. It's great that we're focusing on a particular measure to be able to deliver that. And it means we can look at a range of heating systems, but obviously a lot of what we're looking at is gas connections. We're also looking at heat pumps, heat networks, even oil boilers where appropriate. But a lot of it is around the gas connection, getting gas into properties and setting them up with a new boiler with that. And it really kind of brings up the question of, is that the right thing to be doing? Is that how we want to be decarbonizing these homes? Are we going to end up coming back to these homes in 10 or 15 years' time and ripping those heating systems out and replacing them with something else? And the answer is we don't really know, because we are living to some extent with a policy vacuum around this. We don't really know what we should be doing around heat. And it means that we've got this funding in place, but it doesn't necessarily know where that funding should be funneled. So I think coming out of that, then we need to be thinking really about solutions for how we do this. We need to be thinking bigger than the funding that we've got at the moment, bigger than eco, and we need to be offering something to everyone, really. I look to Scotland as one area where they're thinking a little bit more about this and being more joined up in what they're delivering. They've got something that helps fuel-poor households through their HEAP scheme. They've also got a Home Energy Scotland loan for owner-occupiers as well. And they've even got some funding in place to help social housing meet the minimum standard that they're requiring for them. And that means they are thinking a bit more across tenure. I think there's a lot more that can be done beyond what Scotland is doing as well. But it does mean that they're actually thinking about how do we help everyone? How do we make sure that the funding's available, the incentives are there to unlock the further investment that we need? And of course, what happens then is it makes it a lot more attractive to other funders to invest in Scotland. And so we've seen a lot of money from ECO going towards Scotland because they know that it's going to go a lot further up there because there's other funding that people can tap into. So I think really stepping back from it, we need to accept that there's going to be higher costs associated with delivery until we can get to scale where we can start to bring those costs down. And we need to accept that and the asset value improvements that come with that. We need to really think about that retrofit plan for everyone so that every house knows what they're doing and knows how they can get there in a step-by-step way and think about how that can be funded. We need to have that funding and incentives available for every tenure. And we need to simplify eligibility around that so that people are not confused and they can be helped through it in a much more quicker and easier way to access the funding that's available to them. And finally, we need that policy in place to support and guide funding to make it actually effective for people. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you to all our speakers. That was great. We now do have time for some questions and answers. If you do have a question, would you please identify yourself, identify where you're from, who your question is aimed at, and please try and keep the questions brief so that other people can ask questions as well. So who's going to be first? No? Sorry.
Better be good now after that build-up. Jim Clark from Policy Connect. We work on policy development in Parliament, and we do lots of stuff with buildings and energy efficiency. What's the panel think on what we can do on behavioural change for householders? One of the big problems, other than lack of money for these schemes in the past, was the lack of uptake. Even when they were offered free, lots of householders didn't uptake energy efficiency retrofit, basically because they thought it was a hassle. What can we do to encourage more householders, more residents to be interested in uptaking energy efficiency retrofit for the house?
Is that for everybody? Or anybody want to pick that one up?
Yeah. Thank you. Just seeing if the guys in charge of the AV have caught up. I think that we will. So let me give you a concrete example where in Kirklees over a number of years the local authority offered completely free cavity and loft insulation and a range of other measures at the same time, and with a sustained period of activity, multiple letters, knocks on the door, everything facilitated in terms of scaffolding provision and storage and all the rest of it, they still 1 in 6 households who couldn't take up, who chose not to take up the free offer. And my personal view is that I think we will wait forever for people to care more about energy efficiency than the things that actually preoccupy them day in, day out. So I would say the challenge is actually to work out what's driving behaviours at the moment and then go with the flow of that. So if actually for a certain sector it's all about changing your bathrooms from baths to showers as the kids grow up or whatever, then we should be looking at how bathrooms are installed to make sure that energy efficiency measures happen as part of that. I think that behaviour change is putting the responsibility onto other people to make the difference when actually they've got a load of other things they need to be dealing with. And for many people, saving resources, maybe saving costs is a priority, but saving resources is not something that drives their behaviours. So I would think that actually understanding what's driving current behaviours and then working with that is more important than hoping that lots more people see the light. My take on it.
I think there's a question about what's the product, and if we sort of think back 10 years, nobody was particularly interested in thermostatic radiator valves, and now, people have Nest, people have Hive. There is a lack of kind of consumer focus about what the offer is, and it's a very complicated offer, and I don't think we've got to the bottom of it. We did a bit of work in GM where there was some work around energy efficiency. Actually, when you came back to talk to the customers, the thing they liked the most was it had improved the aesthetic quality of their house, or it had made it more comfortable.
Yeah.
And in some respects, are we selling the right thing to the consumer? And are we segmenting the market sensibly? If you go to somebody who's in their 80s, they're at home a lot, actually you're selling a different thing than if you're looking at somebody who's got a nice riverside flat and wants shiny things. So I think to some extent we've been pushing just the same energy efficiency story, the sustainability, the carbon story, which is great for certain early adopters, and I'm not saying that's not a big part of it, but have we really kind of boiled down what all the different offers might be, and solve them in a slightly different way? Still, perhaps with support, perhaps with some guarantees from local authorities or whatever. But actually, I still think we kind of pushed the same thing. It's square meters of solid wall insulation to hit a policy objective.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Thanks. Patrick Manuel, Dream Studio Architecture. Seems to me that there is we're missing an opportunity in not linking householder planning applications to retrofit. I guess I could point this to Pedro, because I think he perhaps was closest to this area. But it seems to me, I've worked as an architect for all my career. We put on extensions which, the performance of which is just, so far ahead of existing buildings, it's unbelievable. And yet we're doing often nothing, or we're not being forced to do anything to the rest of the building. I know the government had an opportunity probably 10 or 15 years ago to do this and bottled out of doing it. But I think we should look at this and think about how we could maybe use EPCs, and the fact that there is higher EPCs are coming down the line to encourage private homeowners, when they put in a planning application, to be alerted to the fact that if they do more on their existing building, on the rest of the home, not just the extension, that they could help it improve its EPC rating, and that would get us some way towards the retrofit that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. The government's had a number of run-ups to requiring improvements to the rest of the home when extensions are built or major renovations are undertaken. I think long run that still has got to be the approach, and you have to keep running up. There's nothing better than persistence in trying to get policy change, and it is a big piece of behavioural change. We're facing a climate emergency, and I think we can get most of the market movement with the right frameworks in place in a positive, affirmative way with the right products that will come to market if if the industry knows there isn't going to be always chopping and changing in terms of what's on offer to incentivize consumers to do things, because if we had the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund was offering thousands of pounds towards the cost of solid wall insulation for a few months, and all the vouchers get taken up, and then they stop for a few months, and they'd reintroduce it. Which consumer in their right mind is going to say, I'm going to do my solid wall insulation now? No, I'm going to wait and see if this thing pops up again. It's got to be long term, and this is where we need homes to be, homes that are fit for the future. And regulation has got to be the backstop. Sorry about that term. It's got to be the backstop that gets you security and certainty that there will be change down the line. Because it's like seat belts, it's like smoking. There is a minimum level of performance that our owner-occupied homes have got to achieve. Scotland are consulting on introducing such regulation for a backstop date by when owner-occupied homes have to achieve a minimum standard. It's much easier to do the one that you highlighted, where you require some work to be undertaken to the rest of the property when you do an extension. And that has got to come in, and it's about announcing it early, putting a framework in place with incentives and support and advice, but being really clear about from 2025, from 2030, you won't have a choice. But in the meantime, here's a lot of products and a lot of incentives to help you and advice to get you there. And so it's the way to go. Regulation has got to be a part of this. Yes.
Thank you. And to build on that, I think it's a really important point, but I think it's critical that we think about it at the local authority level rather than just national policy. I mean, we need the national policy framework in place, but it gets implemented through the capacity that you've got in the local planning authorities. And those have been stripped to the bone and beyond in terms of being able to be advisors and supporters of change in their area rather than just people who tick boxes and are scared of developers. I think also it's at local level that the practices of the local community of builders and architects really play out on many things that are permitted development as well as things that require planning permission. So we have to think about what's the capacity in the local authority to be advisors, supporters, enablers, rather than people who rubber stamp cost-effective and policy compliant solutions. I think that's a really important dimension.
Can I add to what Alice has said? I'm based down in Wales, and one of the ideas being discussed in Welsh Government at the moment is whether Welsh Government should fund local authority planners and architects in each of the 22 local authorities to come up with what is acceptable in terms of external wall insulation, the appearance of external wall insulation. Because at the moment, not knowing if you're going to get permission to do it is quite a big obstacle to deciding about whether to go ahead or not, and the delays involved are also a risk to you. So the proposal would be that each local authority would develop its own menu or pattern book of acceptable materials, acceptable finishes, acceptable materiality, acceptable patterns, and if you know then that if you pick something from the book, you've already got permission to do it. Next question, please.
Thank you. Paul Savoy, Dunstan Surveyors. Yes, on the matter of VPCs, I think it's a good thing they were introduced. I love them because you get a plan when you go and look at a property. Not very accurate always, sometimes horribly inaccurate. I hope the government isn't taking that as gospel truth. Also, I think the advice is very tick box. I mean, when you talk about insulating the floor, I think the figures are they don't make any sense, retrospectively doing that. Plus, you've got to think about finished floor levels. Anyway, my main point is, what about the properties that do not have EPCs, which must be, well, someone probably has the statistics, which are not sold, people live in them. I was doing probate valuation. I'm a building surveyor, but I do valuation work. The chap had lived there for about 40 years, had double glazing, it was in a flat, put my head up in the roof, 50 mil of insulation if you're lucky. Now, that building is just chucking at least 35+% up into the air. You can have all the double glazing in the world. Now, I think the government, whichever it is, whatever hue it is, should actually bring EPCs and make it compulsory across the board. Now, that won't be very popular, but I think it may save an awful lot of energy if people actually do the simple things like insulate their roof spaces before they do all the complicated things. I'd love to know your opinion on that.
I'll take the. I think this could potentially go back to what I was talking about around understanding what's going on with energy consumption in the home. And if we know a lot more about how energy is being used, if we know a little bit more about what's going on in the property on the basis of the data, and maybe the consumer opening that information up to their supplier, you might be able to, like I say, pick out the basket cases and intervene and provide some advice. I think it's very difficult. You know, we talked about consequential improvements before, which was the issue the other gentleman was raised. People's homes are their defensible space, and they're very precious about people knocking on the door and telling them what to do. I think it's important that we're very careful about how we couch the advice, but actually how we intervene it's very important. So to some extent, if you knock on the door and say, look, as your energy supply, we know you're using 50% more energy than next door. Do you want us to have a look? As opposed to you have a compulsory EPC, or you must do this, you must do that. It kind of changes the conversation a little bit, and I think that's perhaps where we have to go, because we can see energy companies are really looking for a space around energy services, and maybe that's something that the smart meter infrastructure can help them deliver.
Can I add to that?
Can I add to that as well? I think you're right entirely that we really need to rethink how we approach energy services. But I think actually a compulsory approach gets rid of some of the stigma that's attached to it as well. If we're all going out, we're all having it done, and we all know that we've got some options for what we can do to a property, I think that changes the conversation as well. So I think it's you need both approaches to it.
The Dutch government did a few years ago a nationwide mail shot. They compiled data that they had on the housing stock with credit scores and I don't know what, to give a best guesstimate of people's home energy performance and sent that to everyone. And they saw a spike in inquiries to their advice service, and that's something that can be done. Also, the smart meter rollout is a key point of intervention, and I think we have missed the opportunity now a bit around when they get installed. There's the salience to have a conversation around home energy, and there is some conversation had, but it could have been a little bit more. Could have been the delivery method for such a mail shot, for example. But there are ways and intervention points where you can bring this to people's attention to try and overcome those homes being stuck in a rut, as it were. But they'll get there eventually.
Next question, please. She's on her way.
Not
Hello, David Pierpoint from the Retrofit Academy. I may have missed this. I missed the start, so it may have been mentioned. But in May this year, there's due to be the publication of the new BSI PAS standard, PAS 2035, and that has the potential, I believe, to transform the quality that the retrofit sector is able to deliver. I just wondered to what extent the panel agreed with that statement, that it could possibly be transformative, or indeed do they think it's merely just another standard that will get ignored?
You didn't miss us talking about that. We have skated over it collectively. And I think you're right, there's tremendous potential in the new standard, and the way that the new standard has become one of the most tangible outcomes from the Bonfield Review, I think, means that we have to make sure that it is a functioning and useful standard. And I think there are many ways in which, for example, putting it alongside the REBA work plan and understanding the points of intervention at which the standard actually might change the nature of design decisions and installation decisions and general project decisions is really powerful. I don't see at the moment many connections between the development of the standard and its ownership and the vast majority of building and tradespeople who are involved in repair, maintenance, innovation that actually might find that helpful. So I certainly don't want to diss it. I think it's an important kind of description of what good practice might be, but I think in terms of making it powerful and effective, we haven't necessarily got all the connections in place, is my take on it.
Can I just add to that? There's parallels with the system that operates in Germany when people get low-cost finance via KfW, in that the German energy advisor signs off what's to be done, and I think, and that goes back to the bank which is providing the low-cost finance. I think an important thing for the success of PASS 2035 would be that it is mandated, it's required as a condition of access to low-cost finance, that you do have one of the duty holders in there actually say, these are the right measures for this house, and then later say, and they've been installed properly. Next question, please.
Hello, Nigel, a town planner from Kent. As part of the policy solutions, do you think allowable solutions should be resuscitated as a policy? Because obviously by 2050, the majority of the dwellings that exist then exist today. And I just thought it'd be a potential solution because it provides an opportunity to finance the sort of retrofitting of existing stock with these improvements.
Do you mean in respect of helping new build comply with zero carbon standards, allowable solutions to retrofit?
Yes, as part of the commitment for new build.
Retrofit existing housing
Exactly,
alongside.
yeah.
That's absolutely essential. And I totally agree with that, and I think it has to be reinstated. They are reviewing building standards again, and the government introduced this transforming construction challenge that I'm sure many of you might be aware of, around halving the cost of retrofitting buildings to a standard which means that their energy consumption is half what a new build is today. But there's still so many question marks as to what exactly is the innovation that the government's going to support, the activities that are going to drive that, and how do you bring that to scale? But as a mechanism, yeah, that's the purest, best form of allowable solutions, and that should be the way to go.
But there is no point in setting that up without also having the parallel activities, and I'm now sounding like a stuck record, for which I apologise, but the parallel activities that mean there are the practitioners and the trades who can deliver those in a quality way. And I think one of the risks is we get the ideal policy framework, but we don't have the 60,000, 300,000, pick a very large number of people who are the army, who are involved in existing buildings day in, day out, that there is no incentive for them. Because actually, you know, if you've tried to get hold of a decent builder, then they call the shots on when they come to you and how much they charge you and so on and so forth. You know, where's the incentive to shift the industry if allowable solutions is a really important part of the picture, but let's not set ourselves up to fail because we don't have the other bits of the delivery package in place.
Robin Nicholson, isn't there a disincentive in the form of VAT on works existing? I mean, I've heard little discussion of it so far. And how do you actually persuade the Treasury that it's in their interest?
Can I have a go at that one?
Go on.
Yes, it is a slight disincentive because it adds 20% of the cost of what you're doing. But I think going to war with Treasury is a fight that could take 20 years and we would inevitably lose. I think we need to get Treasury on side. I think we have to propose schemes, programs at a scale which enhance tax revenues for Treasury by whatever means so that they support them.
I'll just add to that, if that's okay. France, I don't think they've got it running anymore, but for a while they wanted to use it as a stimulus, a reduction in VAT, which necessitated that when you undertake a renovation to your home, you get a reduced rate of VAT on the whole of the renovation cost, provided you made your home more efficient in the process. Ed Balls, way back when he was Shadow Chancellor, proposed something quite similar without the energy bit, but reduced rate of VAT for renovation. So thinking of it as stimulus and we'll probably be needing some stimulus in the years ahead, is a useful way of framing this, but putting this conditionality of energy efficient, low carbon on that sort of stimulus. I think the Treasury could get behind that.
Right, we are out of time. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to you for being an excellent audience.